River keeps turning. Good evening. I'm Alicia Kintner, President and CEO of ArtsWave. Happy December, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the 5th annual Women's Leadership Roundtable Symposium. We're doing it a little bit differently this year, but hey, it's 2020. Special thanks to our sponsor, PNC Bank and Kay Geiger, for making this event possible. Our intent with the symposium every year is to connect you and inspire you with the stories of really fascinating women who have made the arts central to their lives, and then connect their experiences somehow to local issues and the community impact of the arts. This event is one of the perks of your membership in ArtsWave's Women's Leadership Roundtable. You also have incredible power every year as a force behind the ArtsWave community campaign, so thank you. I want to start our fabulous program by giving you a sneak peek at one of ArtsWave's newest initiatives, ArtsWave Artists at Your Meeting. This is a triple win. First, it's a way to zazz up your Zoom meetings and turn what is becoming kind of the typical way of virtual engagement, right? It's getting harder and harder to do this without interacting together. But ArtsWave Artists at Your Meeting allows you to bring an artist into the experience and really make it memorable instead of typical. It's also a win because we are providing these artists in our local community with a work opportunity at a time when so many are unemployed or underemployed. And then third, it's a way to support the ArtsWave community campaign. So win, win, win. We want to show you what this magic actually looks like right here, right now, by introducing you to one of Cincinnati's really, really talented artists that you may not have had the chance to hear before now. Vidita Konix is a multifaceted vocalist specializing in ensemble music, historical performance, and cross-cultural work. She's equally at home with her background in Indian classical music and her Western classical training, and she fuses the two in a really unique artistic style. Most recently, she was a winner of the 2020 International Young Soloist Award given by the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. She lives in Cincinnati, where she is an active vocal instructor and clinician in both Western and classical Indian styles. We're so thrilled to hear from her tonight. Welcome, Vidita.
Hi everyone, my name is Vidita Konix. I am a Cincinnati-based classical vocalist and soprano, and it is my absolute pleasure to be here today on behalf of ArtsWave, and I'm very excited to present a little bit of music with you all. I wanted to make sure that I kind of dived into the backstory behind this project because I think it really is a very interesting story behind this, and it would be a shame to let that go. So I wanted to start by providing a bit of background on myself. I actually am versed in various disciplines when it comes to music. So I actually grew up with a family of Indian classical musicians, and while I was raised here in the United States, I always felt really, really connected to my personal heritage through this sort of knowledge of Indian music that I grew up with. And I've always considered myself very, very fortunate to have had that background because it really helped me see music in a totally different way. And I remember even as a child, going to piano lessons or being in my school chorus, I always felt like I could relate music back to what I was learning at home with my father, who's a musician, or my grandmother, who's a professional singer. And both of these things kind of happening simultaneously during my childhood was really very, very formative. And as I grew older and I decided to pursue music professionally, I sort of went down this traditional route where you study music at a conservatory and you try out for professional gigs such as, opera or choral or ensemble work and things like that. And once I got through my education and I was sort of ready here to leap into the world of live music making, things sort of fell to a halt thanks to the pandemic. And it has been, I think, a pretty tough time for a lot of emerging professionals And I realized, it was around this summer actually, that classical music actually feels quite behind when it comes to the use of digital media and technology. And I really wanted to try and find a way to find a creative outlet that showcased my sort of unique voice in the music community, and also utilized all of the technological resources that we have that we maybe weren't even aware of. So I kind of started playing around with recording myself, and being largely a choral musician and an ensemble musician, I wanted to multi-track a choral piece because I really felt that I was missing choral music making and multi-track or multi-voice singing and harmonies in that sense. That was one of the things that I did a lot as a significant part of my work, and I really missed it. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna learn all the parts. Usually there are 4 parts in a standard choral piece: soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. And I was like, I'm gonna learn all the parts and record them and layer all of them on top of each other and just see what happens, you know? And it ended up being really, really, really cool, and actually very and enjoyable, and something that I don't think musicians would have ever sort of discovered or tried to do, at least classical musicians, if not for the fact that we had to sort of be thrown outside the box of our usual comfort zone. And I really started enjoying this sort of multi-tracking work, and I wanted to bring in my cultural heritage into play here. And I decided to multi-track a piece called Il est bel et bon. It's a French piece from the 16th century, and I decided to sing it using Indian solfege syllables. So the 7 Indian solfege syllables are sa, ri, ga, ma, pa, da, and ni. And they kind of relate to do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti that you may know from the Western musical world. But the Indian solfege kind of functions in a different way, which I think you'll hear. And applying that to this choral piece just created, I think, a really fascinating musical effect. And I really hope that you'll be able to hear that. The tune itself is really, really infectious. I sang this for the first time in high school, and I mean it when I say that it has been stuck in my head since high school, which is probably why I chose to do this one. And I can probably guarantee it'll be stuck in your head as well after you've listened to it. In this particular recording, I have sung the piece in the Indian solfege, followed by the original French, and the text sort of narrates a little quabble going on between 2 French women discussing their spouses and arguing over who's better than the other or something like that. And I think what's really interesting in the poetry is that one of the little discussions they're having is about tending to the chickens on the farm, and you can actually hear the sound of the chickens sort of being portrayed in the way that the music is set. So I hope you'll enjoy sort of listening for those various musical elements as you listen through the piece. And without further ado, I would like to present to you Il est bel et bon by the composer Pierre Passereau.
Thank you, Vidita. That was just beautiful. A perfect way to start December. We will follow up with everyone tonight after the program with information about how you can bring an ArtsWave artist to your next meeting. Tonight's event was planned by an amazing group of women, our Women's Leadership Roundtable Steering Committee, chaired by Kelly Wittich. Kelly, I'm going to toss the mic over to you now.
Good evening. I'm Kelly Wittich, Chair of the ArtsWave Women's Leadership Roundtable. Thank you for your support of the ArtsWave Community Campaign and for joining us for our annual Women's Leadership Roundtable Symposium, sponsored by PNC. For those of you who are learning about the ArtsWave Women's Leadership Roundtable for the first time, welcome. The Women's Leadership Roundtable was founded in 2014 under the premise that we want to use the power of women and the arts to make our communities more connected and keep our region vibrant. We know that when women come together, we can do powerful things in our community. We have quarterly events that give you an opportunity to network with other ArtsWave Women's Leadership Roundtable members and have unique, behind-the-scenes experiences so you can see your gift to ArtsWave in action. In the last year, we have experienced many things. The highs of Blink, illuminated by ArtsWave, with upwards of 1.5 million people enjoying 4 days and nights of magical art, light, and technological innovation. The collaboration of organizations across the region with the power of her, led by ArtsWave to celebrate the centennial of women's suffrage. A new book entitled Imagineers, Impresarios, Inventors, Cincinnati Arts and the Power of Her, produced by ArtsWave and edited by fellow Women's Leadership Roundtable member Kathy Merchant, links our past history with our current assets and leaders as we celebrate women who have shaped Cincinnati arts landscape. In March came the unimaginable lows caused by the government shutdown of theaters, concert halls, museums, and schools to slow the spread of COVID-19. As they have done since 1927, ArtsWave's donors in 2020 were key to keeping the lights on for our arts and culture and key to keeping the positive effects of the arts, neighborhood vibrancy, and much needed social connections rippling throughout the region. The Women's Leadership Roundtable is at the heart of this. In 2020, 372 members of this group contributed nearly $900,000. Thank you. We will again be counting on women to lend their full force to 2021 Campaign Chair Terry Horan, President and CEO of Horan, when we officially kick off the ArtsWave Community Campaign in February. I hope you will join me as a Women's Leadership Roundtable member in 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly, and thanks again to everybody on the steering committee. Now I'd like to introduce our symposium sponsor and great friend of the arts, Kay Geiger, PNC Bank President of Greater Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky. Kay, over to you.
Welcome to the 2020 ArtsWave Annual Women's Leadership Roundtable Symposium. While I know we'd all like to be together in person, we'll enjoy this evening virtually with 3 wonderful women. Thank you, Alicia and Kelly, for hosting, and we at PNC know how hard it has been this year. So we want to thank you as founding members of the Women's Roundtable for all of your support to our wonderful arts community. Tonight, Ainsley Cameron, Kate Tepe, and Myntia Daniels are going to tell us what their voice means in our community, in our connectivity, and how they are breaking boundaries, providing their voice as women artists. Thank you for all you are doing for the voices of women and for ArtsWave. Enjoy.
Thank you once again, Kay, for making this event possible, and to everyone at PNC Bank. It's now my pleasure to introduce the moderator for our program tonight, Ms. Ray Ball. Ray is a regular, deregular girl from Bond Hill, Cincinnati. Since launching Baller Media in 2015, she's worked with a variety of clients locally and nationally, developing creative, results-driven campaigns. Her audiences and clients range from Procter & Gamble to the startup scene at Centrifuge and Mortar. In November of last year, 2019, Ray was selected as a guest designer for Nike by Cultivator and released her first sneaker collaboration, the Neighborhood Rose Air Max 1. The shoe sold out in 7 days. I didn't get it, did you? Totally cool. And it sparked the Neighborhood Rose Project and the hashtag #MyHoodTaughtMe tour. We're going to learn so much from you tonight, Ray. Thank you so much for being here. Over to you.
Thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Ray Ball, and I am pleased and honored to be your moderator tonight. Today, we'll hear from 3 dynamic and amazing artists. First, we'll listen to a video, and then we'll have a quick chat with them. Afterwards, we'll come together and we'll all have a chat as well. I encourage you to drop any comments or questions in the section, and we'll make sure to get your questions answered. First up, we have Dr. Ainsley Cameron.
My name is Ainsley Cameron, and I'm curator of South Asian art, Islamic art, and antiquities at the Cincinnati Art Museum. Today, I'd like to share my views around how the museum is creating space for critical thinking in conversations around gender. Our current exhibition, Women Breaking Boundaries, features work by self-identified female artists in our permanent collection, all of whom, in one way or another, have harnessed creative means to overcome adversity in their own lives. The friction that this can produce between adversity and creativity sparked, encouraged, and produced moments of great artistic expression. Organizing this exhibition provided the opportunity to look inwards, to reflect on the representation of women artists in museum collections, and to explore our collecting building practices and future strategies. All told, through artists who broke boundaries, either through their personal biography, artistic innovation, or a combination of both. These are artists who disrupted male-dominated workshop traditions and who push societal norms in their work. 2020 has been a beast of a year, and each of us has faced hardship in our personal and professional lives. I offer you here some insight into my own life through a superb rendering of the novel coronavirus created by my 4-year-old son. Let's create space to explore some of the rare positive outcomes from this pandemic, how adversity creates moments of strength, even when the well seems dry. The Cincinnati Art Museum was founded by a group of dynamic women, the Women's Art Museum Association. Cincinnati already had a growing reputation as an art city, and largely thanks to their efforts, by 1881, what is now the Cincinnati Art Museum was officially founded. Our doors opened in 1886. So where are we now? We were founded by women, with strong initial collections created by female artists, as well as those donated or purchased for the collection through female patronage. But how has that shaped our museum, its staff and leadership, and the collecting building practices in the intervening years? Women Breaking Boundaries, now in version 2.0, was initially created as the Art Museum's contribution to the ArtsWave Power of Her initiative. As part of this initiative, multiple regional organizations came together to forefront the contributions of women in the arts and to celebrate 100 years of women's suffrage. It seemed like a fine time to check in with our progress. We're not the only ones talking about gender and underrepresented voices in museums. This graphic comes from the National Museum of Women in the Arts in DC. an organization committed to advocating for women's voices in the art world. The lack of representation of women in museum collections isn't simply an oversight, it's a form of discrimination, and this discrimination against women permeates at all levels, through sporadic and insufficient gallery representation, through significant disparity in auction price realized in sales, and in a lack of coverage in the national and international press. Museums aren't immune. This discrimination permeates museum collections as well. There is significant disparity between male and female artists in permanent collections, gallery displays, and solo exhibition programs. This is a fascinating time to be working in museums as we grapple with the need for radical social change in 2020. Much of that conversation has coalesced around race and the inequity ingrained in antiquated museum structures. Compounded with race, I believe that the manipulation of power in these colonial institutions extends well beyond that. We need to talk about race. We need to talk about gender, about power, about the Euro-American art canon, and we need to talk about privilege. And I say all of that with love. I'm a museum professional through and through, and I'm inspired to work in museums right now, to be part of what could potentially be real change. There are a lot of interesting conversations that are currently happening in both academic circles and the mainstream press that are questioning the museum and its relevancy in today's society. What's become a mantra for me lately is the quote I've pulled for you from this opinion piece. Inclusion is a muscle to be worked and not a credential to be burnished. The first iteration of Women Breaking Boundaries opened long before this article was written and the current social discourse. And yet, the exhibition is part of a larger movement to disrupt established norms. One way to ground our discussion of women in the arts is through Linda Naucklin's 1971 article, Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists? Naucklin, seen here in her 1968 wedding portrait, was an art historian active in the feminist art movement of the 1960s and 1970s. This was a time when artists, curators, collectors, and more incorporated issues of social justice, representation, and advocacy into their work. Naucklin argued that, throughout history, there have been several immovable societal barriers for female artists to overcome. These include access to high art education, to which women had been historically denied, and the acceptance of an art canon weighted towards Euro-American male artists. During her lifetime, Naucklin also asked another important question. What is a woman artist, and why are we differentiating them from male artists? It's an important question to consider. Do we still need to have shows that divide on gender lines? What does it say about the fight for equality that we do still need to create space? So what is this show doing differently, and what does it bring to the conversation? When I was first conceptualizing the show, I didn't feel like I could speak about the underrepresentation of female artists in museums without first facing Cam's demons. My colleague and I ran our numbers, and we were pleasantly surprised. 17.2% of our collection is by female artists, while 12.6% is the national average. Not to say that there isn't more work to do, but as a result of CAM's founding females and the conscientious collecting of curators in the late 20th and 21st century, we are well positioned to have these discussions. As a curator, I'm surrounded by colleagues who similarly advocate for a diverse collection. We can only control what comes from our desk, but monumental change can start with small shifts in perspective. Working with our graphic designers, we devised a plan to use statistics as part of the overall look and feel of the show. I wanted them to be a transparent representation about where we are now, while also demonstrating our commitment to change. Many of the works on display wouldn't typically be featured together in a museum setting. And while each of the objects on view carries its own story, what's particularly interesting about the exhibition are some of the unexpected pairings created. Some of these conversations are created through formal visual connections between objects, like color, light, vista, and visual nuance. Others create connection through the artist's biography and how they encountered the art worlds of their time. Let's not forget that version 2.0 is an exhibition planned and executed entirely during lockdown. These works had never been in the same room together. My initial plan on how and where to hang each work was completely thrown out as soon as I was in the space with the art. When one thinks of harnessing creativity to overcome adversity, I can honestly say a curator must learn to think on her feet. Working at the art museum, always, but especially so this year, provides a sense of comfort through creative expression. The Cincinnati Art Museum is in the business of sharing the power of art with our communities, of creating space for reflection, respite, and inspiration. In May, we took that conversation outside and opened the art climb, linking Mount Adams to Walnut Hills through a procession of steps that brings visual meaning to what was before an impediment to such connection. We'll always be the institution on the hill, but there are ways to literally and metaphorically break down boundaries between where we stand and what we stand for. I started this conversation by acknowledging the weight and difficulty of this year, about how it's influenced my work and practice. Later this winter, should you decide to walk up the steps of the art climb and through the front doors, you'll find Anila Kayum Aga's All the Flowers Are For Me reinstalled in our Schiff Gallery. First displayed at the museum in 2017, it will be received in 2020 in an entirely new way. The piece itself is a steel cube suspended from the ceiling and adorned with laser cutout patterns. The delicate patterns make the steel form appear fragile, although the material is resilient, hardy, even stubborn in nature. Light emanates from the center, creating shadows on the walls, ceiling, and floor that envelop all who pass through. I'd like to finish this talk with a quote from Anila, which will feature on the walls of the upcoming exhibition. My experience of our present moment, living through a pandemic and radical social change, is one of collective grief. Many of us are experiencing some form of detachment as we navigate a world where we wear masks, avoid touch, and still fight for what we believe in. I believe that what we need most of all is physical connection, making this work significant to me in an entirely new way. Human beings are a complex community, one that thrives on intimacy, relationships, and shared beauty. I hope seeing this work creates the space to reflect on what we've lost and what we need to work together to rebuild.
Well, first up again, we have Dr. Ainsley Cameron. So we're going to kind of get right into it. In your current role, do you see yourself as a gatekeeper? And by gatekeeper, I mean someone that has a legitimate seat at the table that can drive change. And if so, how can we continue to ensure that more women in the arts community are in one in these positions? And artists, how do we continue to ensure that they have access and opportunities for the things that they need?
Thank you. That's a great question. It's such a pleasure to be here to share this project with all of you and to grapple with some of these issues. The way that you defined gatekeeper, I think, is really fascinating. And I would love to be that person. I would love to be the person that can create space for some of these conversations to happen. I think in a lot of ways, I've given myself that role. I've taken that role. I've acquired it. I've created that space for myself. And that's something that I really want to be able to do, to facilitate and to create connections for more people in the arts, to be able to sort of move up. I've heard the expression recently, it's sort of like to lead, but bring while you lead, to that extent, so that you you're really sort of opening doors and like keeping them open, keeping your foot in it for everyone to come through as well. I'd love to have a part of that. As for artists in our community, I mean, there's so many great opportunities in Cincinnati and so many great ways to interact with the arts here. This is one fabulous way, right? Through anything that ArtsWave does. So I think there's a lot of resources there, and it's just being really conscious of the way that we consume them, I think.
Very well said. So, Women Breaking Boundaries, it's an amazing display of honestly women disrupting what's really a white male-dominated culture and dominate space. What can we do to continue to disrupt in these spaces so that we no longer have to break boundaries? Or, do we come up with ways where we create our own spaces and we never even have boundaries to begin with?
So I think we need to do both. It's sort of like a two-prong approach to a certain extent. I think we need to be in the spaces, the main space, that white male-dominated space, but we need to be in there with our elbows out. And I think that's really important, right? This idea of occupying that space. And we need to be there to change that space. But we also need to create spaces where we can create a sense of community, either through gender or through other ways that we identify, that we can find a place to come together and be the strongest version of ourselves that we can, which will, I think, help us in that endeavor.
And I kind of want to touch on something you just said, is something I really believe is being the best version of yourself, being the strongest version of yourself. And I think especially when it comes to women in these, very masculine dominated spaces, sometimes you feel like you just have to hold yourself versus having your elbows out and creating that space and actually occupying, like you said, the space versus just being a part of it, just being a fly in the wall. There has to be a time where we're at the table, not because of inclusion or diversity, but because we're at a level playing field. So I really actually applaud all of the women who we'll end up speaking with for doing that, being a part of this and occupying and dominating that space. And you're definitely a part of this. But lastly, one of the things you said in your video, I think it is a quote that, it's hard to find great women artists. Where are the great women artists? And, sometimes it really comes down to, are you looking for women artists? Are you looking for great women artists? Or are you just assuming that, one will fall in your lap and, then she'll be in a highly curated museum? How does that work? And how do we erase that narrative like there's no great women artists when obviously there's an enormous number of them? How do we elevate them so that they're in those spaces where they can be counted equally and have equity, in this art space?
So what I love about Linda Naucklin's article, right, that you're referencing, why have there been no great women artists? It was inflammatory, right? It came out in 1971, an inflammatory title, but it got people's attention, right? And it still does that now. And I think that's what's so important about it. And I think what she's talking about, and I mean, it's in some ways it's kind of depressing how relevant it still is, a lot of the things that she says, but it's things that we're still working on now, and we do need to accelerate the way that we're working on them. But it's breaking down a lot of the barriers that are in the art world already. So those great women artists are there. They don't need to be greater. We just need to open our eyes and see them. And we need to be able to create a more inclusive arts world that includes multiple voices, that includes women's voices, and that actually sort of pushes everyone forward to this level playing field that we all dream about in this alternate reality that will one day we'll get there.
I truly believe that one day we'll get there. Change is difficult and it's not comfortable, but it's something that we all have to go through. And I'll definitely say, during pre-COVID, the arts community is something that I think a lot of people, it was second nature. Like, the museum is there. That art is here. You can do this and that, but you never really thought about how their lives are actually affected by things like that. You don't go to clock in when you begin painting. That is your art and that's your soul. So I definitely would say that, working with a lot of local artists, we did Black and Brown Faces actually at the Cincinnati Art Museum. And ArtsWave was one of our sponsors, thank you guys. And one of our speakers was also one of our featured artists. So I'm going to put that plug in there. But, being able to elevate new faces and new spaces is something that is incredibly important. And I do really want to thank you for being in that place and really trying to drive change.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And as you say, like change is hard. It's not easy, but it shouldn't be easy, right? Like we should be pushing ourselves.
Right. Pushing ourselves to be better. All right. Well, next up, we are going to hear from Daryl Myntia Daniels.
My name is Daryl Myntia Daniels. Daniels, and I'm a visual artist primarily working in painting and drawing. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, and I currently maintain my studio practice in the Bronx, New York. I got started when I was really young as a gymnast. My mom was my coach, and I spent a lot of times in the gym, and when I wasn't practicing, I was creating. I would draw pictures of friends, family members, teammates, and coaches. And they all really encouraged me to keep going. By the time I reached high school, I was encouraged to start painting, and I was commissioned to do a couple of portraits for teachers and for other people around the community. I would go around to different local salons and I would promote my art. And I eventually moved on to study painting at Ohio University. After that, I went on to receive my master's in fine arts from the School of Visual Arts. And since then, I have been coaching, teaching, painting, maintaining my studio practice, doing murals, and different community engagement workshops. Representation for me is so very important. When I was younger, I was often the only Black girl in the room. When I was a gymnast, I was often the only Black gymnast. When I went to college, I was the only Black girl on my cheerleading team. When I graduated from college, I was the first Black woman to graduate from my painting program. When I reached SVA, I was the only Black woman in my fine arts program. And being the only person that looks like you can be very difficult. It can be discouraging. It can feel like you're an outcast. You can also lose your self-esteem and identity in many ways. And which is why it's so very important to represent yourself in art and to see representations of yourself. Some of my favorite artists, specifically women artists, are Elizabeth Catlett, Frida Kahlo, and Toyin Oji Odutola. And each of these artists are very different women, but they all talk about their stories and their identities in very different ways. And it's great to see many forms of representation. Seeing ourselves reflected lets the world know that we exist and that our points of views and our stories are valuable and valid. And people have really been able to express themselves and express their stories through art, and it's been a very healing process. Some of the murals that I've been fortunate enough to work on is the Tremont Health Action Center's mural here in the Bronx. And we did a bunch of different community engagement workshops where people were able to give their input on how they would like to see themselves and their communities and their families reflected in this mural. Another mural that I was fortunate enough to do is in Cincinnati, Ohio, in my hometown of Lincoln Heights. And that mural is titled Black Excellence in Zone 15, and it's located in Serenity Park across the street from the municipal building. And in that mural, we were able to share the rich history of Lincoln Heights. Lincoln Heights is the first self-governing, all Black self-governing community above the Mason-Dixon line. And it is where my grandfather is from, where my father is from, where my great-grandfather is from. And it is such a huge and important history to have to tell to our children. And we had 10 youth working with us to complete this mural. And after they completed the mural, they were so proud of themselves. And they were so honored to be able to see their history and to be able to be a part of their history and to be able to share their history with future generations. So being able to see yourself reflected in art can help communities grow, it can help communities heal, and it can be a great identifying factor for communities to be something great. And a lot of the times when you are a part of that making process, you feel a huge swarm of confidence. And that is something that we need to continue to see within our youth. And even within Black women, right? We need to see ourselves reflected so that we can feel confident within ourselves. And that is why representation is so important to me and to my work. And I'm so happy to share it with all of you. Thank you.
Hi, all right, welcome back. We are going to get into it now with Daryl Myntia Daniels. So again, we kind of work together with Black and Brown Faces. I realized I knew your brother and how small of a world this is. So let's kind of get back into it. Listening to your story, you really have come full circle from what I call, hustling your art in beauty shops to literally being a master of the arts. Back now to, doing a mural in your own community of Lincoln Heights. So what does that mean to you? And what does it mean, in your opinion, for younger artists who may be struggling to feel like they can get out and come back? Or, what is their path? What is their track?
Thank you. Hey, Ray, it's great to see you. Thank you guys for having me. It's really great to be here. So that question, it means so much to me. One, to have started in my community, my local community, and to have been supported by my local community, and then to come back to that the community that supported me, and to bring a mural to that space. The youth that we work with, they really got a firsthand view at what it takes to design a mural, what it takes to install a mural. They even got experience in what it takes to build a wall for a mural. And I know that it's very difficult. Thank you to ArtsWave as well and Artworks. They helped us fund the mural, and they also helped us hire our youth apprentices. And Artworks was also one of my first jobs as a youth apprentice muralist. Excuse me. So these young artists, they were able to get that firsthand experience, and sometimes it's very difficult to get these kind of jobs and to get these kind of experiences and to see these sort of things growing up. And so I would say that I know that the process can be difficult becoming an artist, and you will get a lot of no's, and you will have a lot of questions for how you can go about doing this thing that you really want to do. Mm-hmm. And the only advice that I can really say is to just keep doing the thing. Mm-hmm. Someone's going to see it, show the thing off that you're doing, and it'll happen for you.
I completely agree. In entrepreneurship, that was one of the things that it was always driven into me. It's like, no matter what, just don't give up. Things will be slow, you have your peaks and your valleys, but don't give up and continue to doing what you're doing down your path. Your journey is yours. And what's meant for you is for you, right?
Definitely, absolutely.
Well, next you kind of talked about, being the only version of you in a lot of spaces. And something I really empathize with, growing up, I played soccer in high school and in college and the university I attended, I was always the only Black girl. And it was either you're a token or you're not noticed at all. And, finding that that in-between space where you can just exist and you can just breathe is sometimes incredibly hard. And I can only imagine, how hard it is in the art space. So how did you kind of combat those feelings? How did you combat that negative energy and somewhat turn what could have been a painful experience into a powerful experience, through your art?
So I think Ainsley said something really great in her video. She said something about harnessing creativity to overcome adversity. Mm-hmm. And that was, I had to be creative in order to release a lot of my frustrations. A lot of my earlier works were about some of the microaggressions I was facing. And when I was younger, it was very difficult for me to communicate and for me to articulate, I guess, some of the racism I was experiencing, and to just communicate about it. And so when I was able to paint and have critiques, it allowed me to share my perspective with others, and it helped them to kind of understand a little bit more. And so that's one really powerful and impactful thing about art, is to teach others about our experiences so that they can learn from them.
Yeah, that's amazing. So the last question is, and this is actually something that I pulled from, when you saying you used to paint, people and faces. And so when you look at your own reflection, what do you see? And is that vision and that version of yourself, how has that either impacted your art, or, how has it helped you be more representative of you or your authentic self in these spaces?
That's a great question. What do I see when I look at myself? I think I had a hard time seeing myself from, just growing up and being the only person trying to appeal to certain standards and things like that. So I really had to see the strength in myself and develop and understand the worth of myself, and then kind of translate that into the artwork. I really try to make very empowering and inspiring works for women. And I will often use myself as a reference. And so I'm honestly kind of forced to grow into my confidence through art in that sense.
That's amazing. That's right. And it's awesome to hear again, someone from Cincinnati who's left and come back, and still, whether they're here or there, they still have those ties and they're still living their best life, but again, their most authentic life, again, as a Black woman and artist. So thank you. I appreciate what you're doing for our communities.
Thank you.
Okay, well, next up, and last but never least, we are going to hear from Kate Tepe.
Hi there. My name is Kate Tepe. I live and work in Cincinnati. I want to take a minute to thank you so much for sharing your time with me today, and just say that I am excited to have this opportunity to connect with you. I've been invited to talk about my work because it really centers on identity expression in some way. Even at a very early age, art and identity for me were obvious companions. And I want to point out the obvious, which is that this year, as a nation, we've had an identity crisis. This crisis has really centered around what matters and what is essential. Essential has had a very urgent meaning. As a nation, we've had to reflect on that word, the word of essential. We've had to play with it, we've had to mold it, and Hi there. My name is Kate Tepe. I live and work in Cincinnati. I want to take a minute to thank you so much for sharing your time with me today, and just say that I am excited to have this opportunity to connect with you. I've been invited to talk about my work because it really centers on identity expression in some way. Even at a very early age, art and identity for me were obvious companions. And I want to point out the obvious, which is that this year, as a nation, we've had an identity crisis. This crisis has really centered around what matters and what is essential. Essential has had a very urgent meaning. As a nation, we've had to reflect on that word, the word of essential. We've had to play with it, we've had to mold it, and we're often negotiating it, even with our families, with friends, and really as a community, like a broader community. What is essential, and most importantly, who is essential? Like I said, it's kind of hard for me to talk about my work when these two questions linger. They've lingered all year. I've had incredible opportunities to make public art this year, and at the heart of those opportunities has been this question of what and who are essential. So my work historically often has taken the format of a game. So let's play a game, a thought exercise. To prepare ourselves for this game, let's take a breath, and you choose if you want to keep your eyes open or closed, because we'll be using our minds. So I'll show you. Take a breath in and let it out slowly. Now, in your mind's eye, remember where you were when the stay-at-home order hit our communities. What did you do? Did you listen to music on your way home? Did you watch a movie or a goofy sitcom, crazy documentary? Did you read? Did you even reevaluate your wardrobe? Did you work on a puzzle? Hold that memory in your mind of what you did when the stay-at-home order hit. And we're just gonna kind of set it up on a shelf, somewhere where we can kind of continue to visualize it, but we're gonna examine it. Here's part 2. When you were doing that thing, were you thinking about what and who were essential? And did you pause to evaluate the economic value of those creative byproducts? Like that thing that you were doing. Did you even have the time or the space to think about it? When you were reading that book or playing that game or that puzzle or whatever, did you think about the labor that went into that product or products that you were consuming? Did you think about how much you spent on that item? And did you think, was that expenditure equitable to the emotional reprieve those items supplied? Did you think about how curated your own personal space, which you are now going to be spending likely more time in? Did you think about how much that space is filled with creative byproducts, filled with artists' labor? Now, going back to that thought, to that memory, let's examine it again. Part 3. Imagine the stay-at-home order without any creative byproducts. No books, no TV programs, no fun clothing, no puzzles, no music. Even think about the design of your favorite place in your home. Somebody designed that. It's a creative byproduct. Okay, we're done with the game. Take a breath. Whew. I was asked to talk about how my work demonstrated how the arts contribute to communal growth. But why talk at you when I can think about this with you? It's not really about me. It's an existential question. Is life worth living without creative expression? I ask you, how do artists contribute to communal growth? How have they contributed to your own personal happiness? We have this really incredible opportunity to reevaluate systems and infrastructure because we have to rebuild all of this to get back to normalcy, maybe even someplace better. Where are the resources for our creative community circulating in this region? Are we lifting and valuing the contributions of artists and art workers? Is their recognition equitable to their contributions? How do we ensure these essential members of our community that they're valued? Is valued even the right word? It feels now like a little impotent. It's more, right? If you cannot imagine Cincinnati without creative expressions, then you understand the impact art has on communal health and ultimately growth. And if you do this honestly, you recognize that our region is not homogenous. Our region is filled with cultural diversity. 51% identify as women. There are queer folks, folks with differing physical abilities, and folks with a wide range of economic capacities and cognitive expressions. The question isn't, are artists essential? It's obvious. They are, we are. But how do we folks, or you folks with the power to reimagine infrastructure, how do you build a system that centers that essential need for creative expression and proportionately value a diversity in those perspectives, expressions? Thank you for coming along this game or thought exercise with me, and I hope our time together was fruitful. If you are really curious about my work and my creative practice, you can find me at katetepe.com, or you can connect with our friends at ArtsWave, and they'll give you my personal contact information. Thank you again.
All right, well, we are now back with Kate Tepe. I am so sorry I messed up your name before. Just feel like I am not Katie. So thank you for the grace. But yeah, just to get into it quickly, you spoke about, normalcy, and that is something that I grappled with. Am I the same person that I was 6 months ago, that I was 9 months ago, that I was in January when I didn't even know what a coronavirus was? And the answer is no, I'm not. And I don't think I'll ever be that person again. But, is there a way back to some sort of normalcy, or will we have to continue to accept that we have to go through this discomfort and this growth process to get to what a new normal is? And what does that look like, or can that look like, I should say?
Ray, I love this question. I think it's brilliant. I just want to acknowledge this room, this idea of this room. There's so many powerful women in this room. And so I agree with you. And I think this question is perfect for this space. I think at this point, normal would be a disservice. To go back to what was would be a disservice of the lives that were lost, the pain, the agony, the boredom, the struggle that we've gone through this year. I think we're coming out of this situation. We should be better than that. I think the discomfort of this year is actually a really powerful tool that we really all should embrace, because the discomfort is a result of having to confront these systems of oppression and understanding how these systems not only impact those that are disenfranchised, but that disenfranchisement also robs people that have the most privilege as well, and ultimately robs our communities. So yeah, I think normal, we should be not even trying to go back to normal. We should see how bland normal was, and we should be reaching for something infinitely more vibrant than what we had before.
Agree. I like the word more vibrant than we had before, because when you really think about it, normal is there. It's a place of contentment. It's normal is boring, and I'm the most creative person who can't dance, sing, or draw, or paint. But I feel like when I'm in this normalcy space, I'm bored. And as a creative, being bored is like death to me. I get into almost a depressive state when I'm oh my God, I haven't created anything, because I'm worried about external factors like racial injustice and systemic oppression, and people who look like me and my brother, being killed on Facebook, on the internet. So, bring all of those kind of emotions together. How do you think that has affected you as an artist, as an activist in your own life? And what moving forward, how do you think that will continue to be a part of your story?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really brilliant time to really think about what art is and how artists function. We are in conflict right now with systems. And I love this analogy that I've heard people talk about recently about patriarchy, white supremacy. These are all ingredients of a cake. It's like egg, oil, milk, flour. When you bake the cake, you can't take the egg out of the cake after you've baked it. It's just there. It can't be removed. So we're all in this space. We're all baked into these systems. And artists have always been controversial because they've held a mirror up to these systems. So when we look at other institutions that are supported by these systems, for example, museums or gallery spaces, or, and you don't see diversity. We have to ask ourselves, well, is that working the way it's intended to work, or is it a fault or defect? I think this summer has really forced all of us to say, okay, we acknowledge that these systems are working the way that they're supposed to. But what's been really incredible about this year is that we can see that they hurt everyone. Every single person is impacted by these systems. Nobody's absolved from these systems. So the arts are important and artists are important because artists are really that avant-garde of that First Amendment right that makes America such like a special place. We are expressing ourselves, we're speaking, we're lifting our voices, we're creating, we're bringing it to you in so many different colorful, vibrant ways. And that is why it's so important to not forget about these really important workers, these laborers, but then also like the art workers, the people who stand aside with the artists and support them, you know, the ushers, the security guards, you know, the people that really like keep all of us moving forward in this sort of art economy.
Right. And I think honestly, a lot of those positions and spaces are forgot about. Like, you know who maybe an art director is, you know who a creative director is, you know who, you know, a CEO is, a chairman of the board, you know who all those people are, but you don't know the people, because I found out that the Cincinnati Art Museum is really like a laboratory / vault / like scientific center. And, you know, there's people who are doing amazing things behind the scenes to preserve art, to preserve history. And these are things that are never talked about, but these are real people with lives and jobs that this fine arts community still supports. So it's really important, I think, to touch on, again, those essential art workers. And that kind of leads me into, you know, my next question is, art is essential. Are artists essential workers, and how do we honor and support the power that is in creativity and in expression?
I love that. I've been thinking a lot about service because I think, like a lot of you, I've been doing a lot of like yoga meditation over this past year, just trying to calm my nerves.
Drinking new bourbon.
Yes. I've been thinking about this word service and how sometimes the most powerful thing that you can do, the most powerful form of leadership that you can sort of perform is a humble act of service. I think that for many artists, we create because it's just something inside of us that we have to share. It's a service. And I think that protecting, you know, we are in a philanthropic space, so I think we all kind of will understand this, but we've come together in this community because we believe in something bigger than ourselves, and we believe that there are things in our community that are valuable that maybe are not equivalent to like gold in a bank, right? So we believe in investing in things that are maybe undervalued in a way, or things that are important. And I think, you know, it makes sense 100%. We had to come together for nurses. We had to come together for that single mother who is Ubering, you know, doing the Uber Eats and the Kroger delivery. Like, those people had urgent needs that had to be met. But there are also so many other essential people in our community. And it's hard to start to have this, like, you know, thunderdome of like who should get services, who should get support. So I think it is important to not forget about maybe the quiet people who are always providing a service, because that service comes from a place of love and it comes from a place of a desire to create. I think it's really important to like remember those folks as well. And those people do include art workers. You know, I think of docents, for example. These are people who, some are very privileged, but some just love art, and they might be students, they might be stay-at-home, moms. They just want to come together, build community, and talk about something that they love. So it's important to remember all of those really important people in our community too.
So I'm going to actually at this point bring all of our speakers back together. But while we're doing that, I'm going to also piggyback off of that and lead into my question for all three of you. And, one of that is, this is the philanthropic space, right? And how, from a donor standpoint, I know this year we had almost, over 20 million people were unemployed. And I mean, and that has not really gotten much better since, a lot of these things started. So we look at from a donor standpoint, how can we support you? And I know a lot of times, a lot of smaller donations weren't able to come through, and a lot of the larger donations were not from corporate sponsors, were not able to come through. But one thing that, after talking with a lot of, people in this space is a lot of the individual donors, they double down. The ones who are able to afford, to do that, and they double down because they saw the value and they saw the strength that is especially, I'm gonna say, in this Cincinnati art community. And it's very different than a lot of other cities that I've been in. And I'm encouraged to see that it's really starting to shift and change and, again, disrupt. And I think Cincinnati can honestly be a model for what an inclusive and equitable art scene looks like for a city that's growing. So that kind of leads me into my next question. And as a city that's growing and changing, what does it mean to you all to make waves? What does it mean to you all to disrupt in the spaces that you're in? Well, anybody can jump in.
Of course. I think it's really important when we began to see folks coming together to sort of express their feelings, mass organization coming together. It was amazing to see how a lot of these community organizations just immediately became mobilized. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because it's like the less structured some folks were, the easier it was for them to pivot and get involved. I think it's a great time to start asking questions about unintended consequences and harm. What rules do we have in place? What barriers do we have in place that maybe made sense in a different time, but don't make sense and actually create harm or prevent us from executing our mission now? I think there's rules and requirements and all these loopholes that are there to protect folks, but who are they protecting, and at the expense of, what community? So I think it's a great time to start evaluating some of those systems.
I think if we're going to build a new normal too, right? Like we talked about how going back to normalcy isn't something that any of us necessarily want, that we have to have shifted from then. That's how we build it, right? Like that's how we create it, by having those honest, genuine conversations in order to create change. That's making waves, that's breaking boundaries, it's creating any sort of change. What I love so much about this time is that you can like genuinely ask how people are and like mean it. You're not like, hey, how's it going? You're like, how are you? Are you okay? And like, that's beautiful, right? That I can say that to my colleagues, I can say it to my family, I can say it to my friends, and it's suddenly okay. It's okay for me to openly care for people in my life.
Yeah. I would say as an artist and educator, I feel like right now, I feel more essential than I've ever felt. I feel like our jobs, it's really hit me that, art is very healing. And just for people to communicate with each other and listen to music and do an activity can brighten their days. And, it could be a highlight for some who have literally just been stuck at home, not able to do anything. And so when it comes to breaking those kinds of boundaries, I've noticed a lot of worth when it comes to being an artist.
I'll say it'll be very interesting to see in 10 years and 15 years and 20 years when we look back at the stories that were told through art during specifically 2020. I always understood the term, there's beauty in the struggle, but I want to say this summer, I felt it. I have never seen so many dynamic photographs that what I would consider a normal person took of looking at, a protest, I've never seen such beautiful and heartfelt artwork because they felt it in their souls and they wanted everyone else to understand it and feel it. So I'll definitely say that in 10, 20 years, I want to see what we talk about from 2020. Like, what is that story? How is it going to be told? But the awesome thing is that, we're all part of that story and we're all authors in some chapter of that book. So this is something I actually ask, I think every time I've ever moderated a panel, this is one thing I ask, but I think it's very important. What is something that you would tell your younger self? And by younger self, I'm like under 18, you think you're grown, but you're not grown yet. What would you tell that self?
I had this funny experience when I was growing up, when I turned sort of like 18, 19, 20, 21, every year, I would turn to my parents and I would say, oh, you were so right to tell me not to do that. God, you were right. Like, I had this like immediate visceral reaction where I was like, I had no idea what I was doing then. So I don't know what I would tell my younger self, but
listen to your parents.
Yeah. That would be good. And I guess, there's something about like staying strong and keeping that conviction, but also listening to your parents. Yeah.
I like that, staying strong. Yeah, I would tell my younger self that you're going to be disappointed a lot. You're going to face a lot of adversity. You're going to face a lot of difficulties, but hang in there. You got it.
Yeah, something very similar. Just keep at it and don't give up.
Well, for everyone who is watching live with us today, we are opening up for any questions, comments, shout outs. But I do actually have one more question. So while you guys are thinking about your questions, I have one more for the group. What does art feel like to you? And as an example for me, I'll say creating. For me, creating is like the biggest breath of fresh air with the lightest load on my shoulders. But it's this place that I like to be in where I'm kind of pressured, but I'm pressured to do the things that I'm passionate about. So what does art feel like to you all?
Art is life. Art is it. It's literally everywhere. It is in nature. It's in your homes. It's in your clothes. It's everywhere. And I like that you said you feel pressured to create something you're passionate about, rather than just creating just to survive or something like that. But art literally helps me thrive as a person. It keeps me sane, sometimes drives me insane when I'm trying to meet a deadline or something. But, at the same time, it's like all of those anxieties, all of those feelings that I have bottled up within, it has to go somewhere. And art is the best place to release that in.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I think for me, art was the way in which I found an ability to see the world. I had the privilege of going to the School for Creative and Performing Arts. And I remember Adrian and Althea Thompson, and they were two twins. And they just blew my mind. It was like I had not only one Black female professor to talk about art with, but I had two. And Adrian really introduced me to art history. And before I met her, I thought I was a really terrible student. And then I took her class, and it's like everything started to make sense, because for me, like art history and looking at other creators and seeing all these voices and understanding like why Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo, like why their work looked like the way that it looked, and that they were trying to talk about something, they're trying to communicate something. Like, yes, they were making these images, but they were also telling stories and sharing their perspective, their viewpoint of the world. Like, it just turned something on in my head where all of a sudden, you know, all these different things that didn't seem connected made sense. And I really saw how interconnected we all really are. So that's, to me, it's just really like, it takes me over here by myself and it brings me and connects me to the rest of the world.
I find sort of picking up on both of you, sort of this idea of like art as home, and then art as connection. For me, I feel like it's everything, right? Like for me, it's where I find inspiration, and it's where I have inspiration. But it's also it's home, it's comfort, it's where I live, it's what I know and navigate. You know, like I'm never more comfortable than I am in a museum gallery, walking through those spaces, or in a museum basement. Like, there's just something that you know and recognize, and it's one of those spaces that I feel at home within, which is great. And I know that museums aren't that for everyone, but it's nice for me to be surrounded and inspired and to have that connection to art on a daily basis. It's like, it's fulfilling.
You guys are living y'all's best life. but you know, with that, again, I'm sure it's sacrifice that I'm sure a lot of people don't see. They see the cool art, they see the cool jobs, but there is sacrifice that goes, especially as women in this space. So again, you know, you guys are not only making waves, you guys are like natty tsunamis, and I love it. And in closing, I would like to thank everyone who has attended and been a part of this awesome roundtable of really encouraging and impactful women. And I hope that you are able to continue the fun and join in the Zoom breakout rooms. If you registered, then you would have gotten a link in your email this morning. And lastly, thank you for joining in tonight. Thank you for your continued support of ArtsWave. Goodbye.
You gotta live your life right. Oh, mama, dear. Just like the wide wing